Hello and welcome to Full Contact Nerd. I'm Chris Alvarez and thank you for listening. I'm speaking with Nisi Shawl, editor of New Suns, original speculative fiction by people of color, published in 2019 by Solaris. Thank you for speaking with me.
I'm so happy to do this.
Thank you. And I'll add one more thing. Winner of the 2020 Locus Award for Best Anthology. So tell me. Yeah. How exciting, I assume it was exciting. Can you tell me about that feeling or experience?
Yes, I was totally unprepared for New Suns to win. I know it is a great anthology. I mean, I've known that in my bones ever since it was published, and I knew it beforehand when I was working on it. But I was up against some pretty stiff competition. Mm-hmm. And I really, really sincerely did not expect to win against Gardner Dozois, Ellen Datlow, all these giants.
Mm-hmm. But it happened. I guess you. So that's good. So tell me, how did you and this project come together? Did you develop it, or was it given to you? How did it work out?
It was given to me. It was the idea of John Oliver, someone who is no longer with Solaris, and he approached me with the idea, and at first I was a little nervous. I have some other editing experience under my belt, but this seemed like the kind of thing that could influence the field, and I wanted to do it right. So one of the things that happened was we had to negotiate around the pay rate for the authors. I wound up with a smaller anthology because I wanted to pay them more, basically. Mm-hmm. Okay. Otherwise, I would have had 2 volumes.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of, obviously there's a lot of excellent work done by other than white writers.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna say there's a question I have. I'll save further down the line. But so let's first talk about how did you go about choosing, whose stories, or not on the people, but on the stories themselves. How did you choose the stories? Did you make sure there was a balance of genres, or were you looking for a sort of aesthetic that connected everything? How did that work out?
I was really looking for a balance. I wanted a balance in genres, definitely, which some people will see as a flaw in the anthology. It doesn't lean one way or another, but I kept very careful track, so much horror, so much exoplanetary science fiction, so much unclassifiable stuff. And that was the thing that I noticed as I was going through the stories that I received, was that a lot of times things could be classified in more than one genre. I think that's inherent in work by people who are traditionally marginalized, traditionally outside the field. Mm-hmm.
Were these original stories, or they were stories that had been previously published?
They were all originals. That was one thing that I stipulated in my call for submissions, that these would have to be previously unpublished. I also stipulated no poetry because although I am a poet, I don't see myself as a good poetry editor.
Mm-hmm. How much editing? So just thinking about the process, do you choose the stories first and then go about editing them to fit within what the anthology required, or how did that process work?
Oh, well, there were some stories that I edited more heavily than others, but I wasn't trying to make anything fit. I was looking for things that would fit. And occasionally, I had sad things where there were 2 stories with someone getting their heart ripped out, and I just could only have one of those. It's the kind of thing that you can't have like 3 or 4 stories about people getting their hearts ripped out in one anthology. it's too much.
Mm-hmm.
So I selected the stories based on what I'd already chosen, and also just this feeling of, I want to say, things that moved me. I mean, that's how the best editors do it, is if it affects them, if they keep thinking about the story after they've read it, it's not something that they can neatly fold and put away. It's something that stays with them.
Mm-hmm. What would sort of how many stories are there in the anthology?
There are, let me count, I think there's 17, and then there's my afterword and LeVar Burton's forward.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, I was right, 17.
Mm-hmm. So, does it have, what rating would you say the book has if it were a movie?
Oh, it would be X.
Oh.
The whole anthology, because there's one very explicit story in there with I won't say which one even, but yeah, X.
Okay. Were there any themes or aesthetics that you avoided, like as far as like if there were excessive violence, did you avoid that, or was there anything that you tried to what kind of boundaries were there, if any?
Well, I really didn't have to worry about that because it was invitation only, so I was inviting people that I knew would share my values, I guess, you would say.
Okay.
Yeah.
So tell me a bit about, so we've touched a little on what the stories are like. So someone who opens the book, what sort of settings and protagonists and that sort of thing can they expect to find? I know it's a wide range, but maybe a taste of that.
Well, okay. Let's see. We open up on Earth and we finish on Earth. We go back and forth in history. There's some fairly contemporary stuff, some stuff set several centuries back, some set several centuries in the future, or even just a few decades in the future. There are stories that take place in the U.S., in a post-apocalyptic U.S., in the Caribbean, in West Africa. It is really pretty much all over.
Mm-hmm. Which of the stories most surprised you when you got them? Maybe you didn't expect what you got in a positive way. I'm not saying stories that you were disappointed with, but what was there that you didn't expect and really liked?
The thing that I did not expect was all the humor. There is a fair amount of humor. The story by Stephen Barnes, Come Home to Atropos, that had me rolling on the floor with laughter. The first time he read it to an audience, one of the audience members complained that she laughed so hard she snorted milk out of her nose. So, yeah, just generally that. And then I was just absolutely swept away by the wonder of a couple of stories. One by Alberto Yanez called "Burn the Ship." Mm-hmm. There were things that devastated me with their beauty.
Were there any sort of tearjerkers among the stories?
Well, there were certainly things that made me feel pretty wistful. I would say Rebecca Roanhorse's story was not. Yes, it was wistful because it was a response to tragedies that I know actually have happened. Yeah.
Do the stories, how many of them, if any, do they deal with being a person of color, dealing with racial issues versus just being a story that happens to be written by a person of color or a non-white person?
Oh, I don't think you want my answer to that one.
No.
Because I don't see that dichotomy at all.
Okay. It's fair enough.
I can tell you one thing that all of the stories had in common, well, not all of them, but most of them.
Mm-hmm.
And that was that I was told over and over again, I never thought I'd sell this story. So these were stories that had not been published because they did not fit the paradigm that was presented by the magazines or sites or anthologies that they'd been offered to. So they were stories that people wrote because they needed to write them, stories that were in their heart, and stories that they thought would not see the light of day.
I'm speaking with Nisi Shawl, editor of New Sons, 2020 Locus Award winner for Best Anthology. You can find more information on her work at nisishawl.com. If you like this podcast so far, please subscribe to it and rate it if you can. Please go to my website, chrisalvarez.com or fullcontactnerd.com for links to news, videos, new books, and my social media links. You can find the links to my other podcasts and associated book lists at historyrabbithole.com. That's rabbit as in the animal. historyrabbithole.com. And now back to the podcast. Do you think that the short story outlets are they doing a good enough job, or is it sort of, some authors would say it's just kind of window dressing, for now?
Well, I think that is a question that is the answer is a moving target. I think that it's something that is changing rapidly, so rapidly that by the time I finish this sentence, probably it will have changed in some substantial way. For a long time, we've had people who are making an effort to be more inclusive in publishing, but they haven't necessarily gone about it effectively. And I think that is changing. And it's the kind of thing, do you know Octavia Butler was trying to put together an anthology much like this, what was it, 30 years ago. So the fact that this anthology, New Sons, has been published, that's amazing. And that's progress. And I think the pace of the progress is picking up.
Okay, good. Yeah, that sort of leads into the other question I'd wanted to ask, which is, again, is this something that people are just, obviously, that the industry is really difficult for people to break into, one, and it's especially difficult if you're not part of the club, so to speak, to put it mildly, if you're not white. So again, the question is, okay, so here's the question. How do you make sure that the progress keeps moving forward at a faster rate? Do you see things within the industry that could be done?
Yeah, and people are actually doing them, which is so heartening. I think that at this moment there's very little pushback, and of course there will be pushback later, but there are things like the SIFWA statement in support of Black Lives Matter. Not only did they say, oh yes, we agree with all these things, they actually did concrete things like waiving the membership fees for authors of color. And let me tell you, that can make a huge difference. So how do we keep that kind of thing going? Ask for it. Demand it.
Okay, so on the audience needs to be be proactive about that. Yeah.
Yes, and also to be positive when efforts are made, to say, I can see that you want to do better. Here's how you do it.
Can you explain that? I didn't quite follow.
So, this is the kind of person that I am. I don't just say there's a problem. I try and come up with solutions. And I'm saying when people make an effort when white people, establishment people, make an effort to be more inclusive, applaud that.
Mm-hmm.
And also say, and here's how you could go further. Here's how you could do better. This is how this affected me, and this is what would make your efforts resonate more clearly with my needs.
Okay. All right. So just keep the conversation going. Keep in people's ears.
Yes. Keep it going, and also keep talking amongst ourselves. The conversation is not just like a one-way. It's not a binary thing.
Mm-hmm.
So people who have some sorts of privilege because they are, for instance, a model minority, need to be in conversation with people who are oppressed along a different identity, a different access.
Mm-hmm. So let me ask about gender within this conversation. Do you find it easier for either gender, who happen to be people of color, to succeed right now, or do you see a breakdown there in any way?
Okay, well, first of all, I think there's more than two genders,
mm-hmm.
and you were asking about either gender.
Right.
So I would say people of all genders.
Mm-hmm.
And for a long, long time, this was something that people were talking about, that it was easier for publishing to accept the presence of a stellar Black female author than a stellar Black male author. The example being Octavia Butler. And there's also this pressure historically to have just one representative. And I think that has changed, which again is something that I tried to illustrate in this anthology, that there are people in this anthology who are, of varying gender expressions, very different sexualities, and I wanted to make sure that I had a representative cross-section, if you will, of
mm-hmm.
authors.
Okay. And I appreciate the correction, actually. I should have, I spoke too quickly, and I do appreciate that. So another question I had along the same lines, so you were talking about giving positive feedback to people trying to make change within the establishment. How much negative feedback do you think is appropriate in this situation? Obviously, people who are pushing back and saying this shouldn't be done should get a lot of negative feedback. But how about...
Well, I don't know. I said positive, but really what I mean is realistic feedback. Because if you're only going to be giving positive feedback, then you're sort of censoring yourself. And sometimes that is just not appropriate, and sometimes it's not helpful.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to make sure that everybody includes things that could be seen positively in their realistic feedback, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
I think it makes sense, but I think I need maybe more examples to understand better what you're describing. Okay,
so I can sit around and talk about how a story of mine was rejected because it had it played off of an attitude that is a deep part of my community. I'm specifically thinking of my story, Cruel Sista, and the attitude that I'm talking about is the attitude towards hair in the African-descended communities in the U.S. There's like all sorts of grades of hair. The closer your hair is to that of white people, that's called good hair. The better your hair is. So I wrote a story in which one sister killed another because, in part, well, you never know why anybody kills anyone. But her motivation was her sister had good hair and she had bad hair. And I could tell you about all the places that rejected it. One editor said, "This is such a trivial point. Who would murder someone over the quality of their hair? This is just unrealistic." Which, not my experience, not at all. But I could also tell you that it was finally bought by an author who was white, but valued my experience and understanding of the issues that was present in my community. So you can accentuate one or the other, or you can include both, and that's what I try to do.
Interesting. What do you think of so social media, the use of social media in pushing change? Do you see, and we're definitely getting beyond the scope of the book, but it's, is that okay? Or do you mind talking about these subjects? Because it's very important, I think, and interesting to me, but...
Well, if we get too far afield from the book, I'll rein you back.
Okay. So I'll just ask one more question about this. The use of social media in advancing the success of authors who are not white. Do you see do you see positive or negative or a mix as far as the use of social media?
Oh, my experience of social media in promoting the works of people of color is overwhelmingly positive. My only quibble is that people keep repeating the same questions over and over again when the work has been done, the lists have been compiled. And so, after years and years of people saying, are there any Black people that write horror? There are actually very well-maintained lists of this. And anyone who's asking that on social media is not doing their homework, and there's plenty of resources out there.
Yeah, definitely. Are all the authors American authors, or? In New Sons, yes. No. Let's see. Some of them are living in the U.S. But are from other origins. Some of them are living in Canada, and again are from other places. The only one that I could name that's currently living in the country of her birth is Jamie Go. She's currently living in Malaysia. But others, Indra Pramit Das is from India. Min-Soo Kang is from South Korea, but they're living in the U.S. Hiromi is living in Canada, Hiromi Goto, and so is Karen Lawachi. And so is Chinelo Onwalu, who's Nigerian by birth, but living in Canada. So it's international-ish as an anthology. Okay. I'm curious how many Nigerians are in this anthology, just because Nigeria is so huge, the population-wise, I think it's 1/5 of the African population.
Yeah. Only Chinelo. I had a couple of other authors that I asked, but I was not satisfied with what they gave me. So.
Yeah, I'm just surprised there's not.
Also, this was a small anthology.
Yeah, no, I understand. I'm just always surprised at considering the size of Nigeria, it feels like there should be and I know there is some being published in the U.S., but it seems like there should be so much more, and not just stories, but shows and movies and that sort of thing.
Yeah. And also in the UK and New Zealand and Australia, Kade Thompson, who's not in this anthology, is a Nigerian-born author who's got, I think 4 novels out, 5 novels. So hopefully he's clearing the way for some more attention there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Did you have to do any research for any of the stories? I know it's fiction, but was there any background work you had to do?
No, I was just going with what the authors had found out, letting them do the work.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And are the stories, are they lengthwise, are they all pretty similar, or are there some that are very short and some longer?
The shortest story in there is 1,600 words. Silvia Moreno Garcia's "Give Me Your Black Wings, Oh Sister." Just so beautiful. The longest one is actually the most explicit one. "The Freedom of the Shifting Sea." That's 8,000 words. So there's a range. Only a little bit of flash, if you would call that. Only one piece that's flash. I set a limit of 8,000 words, and some submissions went over that substantially, and I just said, I'm not reading that. Nope.
Yeah. No, I get it. I understand. So what books, movies, shows, that sort of thing inspire your work?
Oh, I don't know. I will tell you that Everfair, the novel that came out in 2016, the one that most people know me for, was inspired, believe it or not, by Middlemarch.
Okay.
By George Eliot.
Right. Yeah. I haven't read that, but it's one that it's often talked about.
It's a Victorian novel of manners. So what does that have to do with what I did? But the dynamics of it, I think, are what I was going for.
Mm-hmm. But what do you like in general, as far as other works that sort of spark your imagination, or in general, not just for what you've created? Oh,
you mean like what do I enjoy?
Yes.
Because that's quite different than what inspires my work.
Yes.
Yeah. I have been enjoying. I got to do a sneak peek of Tanana Reeve Dew's novel, The Reformatory, which is really eerie and creepy, and she does know how to do that kind of stuff. I also, it's been a couple of years now since it came out and since I read it, but I'm still thinking about and going back to Cory Doctorow's novel, Walk Away, which has a lot to say about how people behave in catastrophes and how that can be revolutionary. Yeah, and I so enjoyed Matt Ruff's novel in short story format. He did this thing where he's writing different stories from different viewpoints throughout. It's called Lovecraft Country, and Jordan Peele coming out with I think it's in August, coming out with a series based on that book. It was great.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that show. So, are there any particular genres that you are drawn to, just as far as consuming as an audience person?
So, here's another huge confession. I am a huge Outlander fan.
Yeah.
So what you may not know about me is that I've lost about 60, no, I would not say 60. I'd say more like 40% of my vision. I have glaucoma. Reading is difficult for me. I don't drive anymore. I don't go to movies, but watching movies on my phone is like, I have this magic window into a world where I can see across the room. So I consume a lot of that sort of thing, a lot of series and movies on my phone. And Outlander, oh my gosh. Have you seen the show?
No, I'm familiar with it, but yeah, I have to admit I have not.
Yeah, it was produced by Ron Moore, who did,
Oh, Battlestar Galactica?
Yes, yes.
Oh, okay.
So for me, he brought the Battlestar Galactica sensibility to this story of time-traveling people who go back to the 18th century of Scotland. Also, I lived in Scotland for a while, and so it's all very nostalgic to me. He got the kilts right. The people who did the costumes, the casting, they were all on point. Huge fan of that show. I've got like 3 T-shirts from the fan club.
Okay. All right. So just...
And I will add that I'm very curious that I believe there are many, many, many fans of that show who are people of color. Though it's focused on this interplay between 2 white people, it's also, I think, very exemplary in the way that it shows how the British Empire practiced their colonialization and their imperious tactics on Scotland before they applied them elsewhere.
Would you say, because you did point out how much you like the costumes and the setting and stuff, does what you just said about the political side, is that necessary for you to enjoy the show also, or is that just something positive you see in addition to it?
Oh, it's absolutely necessary. It's why I'm watching, basically. Yeah.
Okay.
I've talked with Timmy Duchamp, about this to a great extent. There are people who think of the politics in their fiction as like some sort of spice, it's like adding to it. And then there are people like myself, and people like Timmy, who think of it as the actual food, It's not like the sauce, it's what's being sauced.
Okay. And the rest is, and the costume and setting is the spice to that.
Yeah, or even they are showing how the politics work. For instance, using local dyes in the costume is a statement about the availability of dyes, the availability of money, the access to trade, that sort of thing. You see what I'm saying? And that's why I think of it as a science fictional mindset, because it's integrated.
Wow. I should check that show out. I'm sure, obviously, a lot of people enjoy it, so. I'm speaking with Nisi Shawl, editor of New Suns, 2020 Locus Award winner for Best Anthology. You can find more information on her work at nisishawl.com. If you like this podcast so far, please subscribe to it and rate it if you can. Please go to my website, chrisalvarez.com or fullcontactnerd.com for links to news, videos, new books, and my social media links. You can find the links to my other podcasts and associated book lists at historyrabbithole.com. That's rabbit as in the animal. historyrabbithole.com. And now back to the podcast. So back to the anthology, I did sort of ask about threads, but I'm also curious, would you say, did it have a sort of soundtrack in your mind as you read these stories? Does any kind of music pop out?
Absolutely not. And I work with music a lot when I write, not so much though when I edit. I think it was because there was so much variation in the stories and where they were coming from that I couldn't pin it all to one soundtrack. Okay.
So as far as doing the editing work, was there anything out of the ordinary that, say, you do as an editor to get it completed?
I'm not sure what you mean by out of the ordinary. I mean, I wasn't standing on my head.
Well, whatever you might consider something different than maybe how other people approach the task.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I think I've been told, at least Ursula Le Guin told me this. She told me that not only was I a good editor, but I was a nice editor. In other words, I'm very diplomatic. And trying to bring out the strengths of the story rather than just, make it conform to my idea of what the story should be. I'm trying to understand what the author's doing. And that's probably down to me being an author also.
It's interesting if she had to mention being nice, how many editors have not been nice. That's
yeah, well, and she did not suffer that, did she? No.
Yeah. So I guess as an editor, how do you, as you said, you're trying to understand what the author is getting at. Do you get into things like, oh, there's too much dialogue here, the dialogue doesn't quite feel right, or, do you get into what do you get into?
I get into, what is the lasting image that what is your ending supposed to do? And are you directing the reader's attention to where you actually want it to be, for instance? I did that with one story. And in another, I thought that the author was not making the main character address a problem that was glaringly obvious to the reader, or at least to me as a reader. The author was letting the main character off the hook, and that involved quite a bit of rewriting, but the author was very happy with what I came up with. They're all very happy, at least they say they're very happy with my suggestions.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how often does the author actually end up winning the dispute or the debate?
I can think of one instance where I asked for something and did not get it, and I have to go with the author's take on that. The author knows what they were trying to do. The author knows if my suggestions are taking them away from their goal. And so if they don't accept it, then I take what they want.
Is it more an issue of, do you point out problems and offer solutions, or do you just say, this doesn't feel right, give me something different? Sometimes
if I see a solution, I will ask if this is what they want to do. It's not, it's not, I don't prescribe that I offer options.
So you do give possible approaches to
right.
Okay. Have you edited other anthologies or other people's works?
Yeah, let me see. I'm probably not going to do these in the right order, but I edited an anthology of nonfiction called Wisconsin Chronicles 5, Writing and Racial Identity. So that is part of a series that Aqueduct Press has done, where people write articles about this convention, WisCon, that happens over Memorial Day weekend every year. It's a feminist and social justice oriented science fiction convention. So I edited that by myself. I co-edited an anthology called Stories for Chip, which is a tribute to Samuel R. Delaney. I co-edited that with Bill Campbell. I co-edited another nonfiction anthology, Strange Matings. It was a bunch of poetry and articles, essays about Octavia Butler. And then I edited an anthology called Blood Children, which is just original fiction by people who had received the Octavia Butler Scholarship. And I've done guest editing on a couple of special issues of magazines. Fantastic Stories of the Imagination. I guest edited that, and I did part of the People of Color Destroy science fiction I did the reprints for that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So how's your approach to editing changed over time, if it has?
I'm not sure that it has. My approach is find the people that you want, ask them if they can do what you need, look at what they give you, decide if it works on its own, if it works with what else you're cultivating. I should mention that I'm currently involved in a project called Afro SF, which is a very short anthology of original speculative fiction by African-descended people.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I'm co-editing that.
And you said Afro, what was the last part? I went
Afro SF.
SF. Okay. I didn't quite hear you. And your writing, how has that, as being an editor, how has that changed your writing at all?
I think it's made me sure of what I'm doing, actually, which I don't know if people would have expected that. But being on both sides of the idea of changing things and revising, I see now that there are things that I can change and things that absolutely no, that's not going to work.
Mm-hmm.
There was someone who asked me to begin a short story with a flashback, and I couldn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't take the story. Someone else did. It's given me a sense that there are things that editors ask that they have to get refusals for.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I can imagine it's difficult for a new author to resist an editor, and stick to their position.
It is. I've had some encouragement along those lines too, chiefly by Eileen Gunn, another Seattle writer, who I've been friends with for years, and I do some co-writing sessions with now, and she's like, there's a difference between I ate my Mapo and I ate the Mapo.
Mm-hmm.
And if you mean one, stick to that.
Say that last part again. I didn't quite catch it.
If you mean the first one, stick to that.
Mm-hmm. I guess for a new author, then, again, there's this fear like I have to break in and just do as, how about the idea I'll just do as I'm told, now, and then when I get bigger, I'll have more leeway.
I've done some of that. I've written a short story which came back from the editor saying, we don't feel the crime-ridden nature of this neighborhood that you're talking about. And I didn't make it more crime-ridden. I just had to be explicit about this is a very bougie neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
This is middle class. This is not crime-ridden.
Mm-hmm.
And I could have gotten discouraged and gone along with their vision, but I had to basically explain in the text why it was different than what they thought it was.
Mm-hmm.
So I did a little bit of that. There's also a ton of opportunity, I guess you would call it, for publication with people who may not share the same restrictions.
Mm-hmm.
And not to mention self-publishing.
So you do. So there's the whole. Yeah, so do you see self-publishing as a good avenue for authors, or what should the approach be?
I am not sure. There are people who are doing very well with it and people who are just not getting anywhere with it. And these are people who've been at it for a while. Mm-hmm. I went to a conference in Florida a couple of years ago, NINC it was called, and there were like hundreds of women there who were making thousands of dollars every year from selling their book and self-publishing. And then there are other people I know who we sold 20 copies. That that's not going to keep them in tofu. So I don't know.
It seems that having a good distribution network seems to be important. I think that, that's traditional publishers have access to, they can push out a book, publicize it and get it into stores and whatnot. That's their strength.
The publicizing, the advertising that they do. I've only done one self-published book that was Blood Children, which the Carl Grannon Society put out for as a fundraiser, basically. Mm-hmm. And so that did well. But I don't choose to spend my time marketing as heartily as you would have to do to be self-publishing all your stuff. I don't want to spend all my time doing that.
Yeah, that's what I've heard and seen, that a self-published author has to spread their time across a bunch of business functions as well as trying to be a writer.
And there's plenty of that already, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What non-writing or non-editing work have you done that's influenced how you do your writing and editing work?
Oh, it's all material, everything. I sold structural steel. Teaching is probably the thing that I do the most, and I don't know how it has influenced what I write, other than making me realize that people understand things in very different ways, mm-hmm. And that they need different hints and clues as to what's actually going on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That sounds like the diplomatic part of you saying, looking at the world from other people's eyes to figure out why they're making mistakes, as far as understanding others.
Yeah, or understanding my work. Hey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. More to the point. So a bit of a whimsical question here. When you were younger, was there any power, technology, or fictional setting that you yearned for or to be part of?
Yeah. I really, really wanted to be able to end world hunger. And I thought that, just some sort of like universal matter transmission would be the solution. It seems incredibly naive to me now,
Well, you had your dreams.
Yeah. But I definitely, I would like, if I was on the swing, I would be pretending that I was dropping food parcels over, well, at the time, East Germany was starving, right? So, mm-hmm. And just everywhere. I wanted everyone to be able to at least survive.
So that seems to be sort of a science fiction-y kind of power. But did it have? Were you motivated at all, like by Star Trek or something, or as far as?
Oh no, this is pre-Star Trek. Mm-hmm. Matter transmission. No, I don't know where I came up with that from. I did read science fiction when I was around the age that I'm talking about, but the only television really was The Twilight Zone. So, that was even close to science fiction, and it wasn't always science fiction. So, yeah, where did I get that idea from? I don't know. Maybe I was a science fiction author back then.
Yeah. So were there any difficulties in completing this anthology in the end, or was it a pretty standard project as far as editing projects go?
Okay, so I had asked someone who I'm not going to name, I had asked them to write the introduction. They had also submitted a story. I rejected the story. They told me that they were not writing the introduction. So that kind of threw me back for a little bit, but I also was able to, I was hanging out with LeVar Burton. He had read a story of mine for his podcast, and he said that he owed me a favor, and I'm like, well, here's the favor. Could you please write an introduction?
Mm-hmm.
So I was able to come back, but it did throw me for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I had the perfect person to do the introduction.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess you adapted, and I mean, LeVar Burton seems like a pretty strong name to attach to the project.
Yes, and he loves science fiction.
Mm-hmm. Which is interesting. Actors, you don't necessarily see people who played in science fiction shows like the subject, but that's cool. That's good to hear.
Yeah.
What's your next writing or editing project? You did mention one that you're working on. Are there others that you would...
Yeah, there's actually another editing project too. Library of America is putting out their first volume, hopefully of many, of Octavia Butler's works. You know, they do like annotated reprints of, they've done Philip K. Dick, they've done Ursula Le Guin, Raymond Chandler. So they're doing Octavia Butler, and I'm co-editing that with Jerry Canavan. So that's pretty exciting. I'm also writing a sequel to Everfair on chapter 4 of a projected 16 chapters.
Okay. Are there any other authors, older authors, non-white authors who you think should have as much notice as, say, an Octavia Butler, but who haven't gotten that notice?
Yes, absolutely. I can't go a day without mentioning Samuel Delaney.
Mm-hmm.
He has received some notice. He hasn't excited people to the degree that his student, Octavia, he actually taught her, has done. But he is, as far as I'm concerned, a genius, one of the best writers living, maybe one of the best writers ever. I also am a huge, huge fan of Charles Saunders, who, not a science fiction, more fantasy, but man, he gives Edgar Rice Burroughs a run for his money. He gives Robert Howard a run for his money. He has put out at least 4 novels and several short stories on this African warrior fighting magic, that kind of theme. So very Conan-esque, actually. I also just adore Haruki Murakami. I don't know if he qualifies as older, and he's certainly not a U.S. author, but wow, I wake up from dreams of his novels. They really move me.
Okay. Good. Okay. Any others, or that seems like a pretty strong list there?
That is a strong list. I wish that Gloria Naylor got more press for Mama Day, which is an extravagantly beautiful novel, definitely a fantasy. She's deceased.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Trying to think anybody else that, is like, has wowed me and made me think, hey, you need more attention. I can't think of anyone else right now.
Okay. So where can people find your work online? Do you have a web page or social media?
Oh, I do. I have a website at nisishawl.com, which is really, really out of date.
Yeah.
But, it does have links to a bunch of my stuff. I have a new-ish book out called Talk Like a Man. It's a short story collection with an essay and an interview. That's Talk Like a Man. That's out from PM Press. And another collection called Primer to Nisi Shawl. That's out by Dark Quest Books, and that has short stories. Also, one that I just wrote for the collection, scholarly pieces on my work, an interview, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
LeVar Burton has now done a podcast of 2 stories of mine. He's done a podcast of Black Betty, which he did live in the theater, and he did a podcast of the Water Museum. So he likes my stuff.
What's the podcast name?
LeVar Burton reads.
Oh, okay. Pretty straightforward. And I'll spell your name for people if they want to check out your website, even if it is outdated. NISISHAWL and .com, you said?
Yes, yes. And it's also the sort of name that is really easy to get hits on with Google. So you can find some of my stuff online that way, too, if you just want to enter Nisi Shawl in the search engines.
Okay. That's all the questions I have. Do you have any final thoughts or words?
I'm just really, really proud of New Sons. I'm really proud of the contributions, and I hope that people read it and enjoy it and find a lot of depth and beauty there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for speaking with me.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
Thank you for listening. If you like this podcast, Full Contact Nerd, please subscribe to it and rate it and review it if possible. I have many other options to geek out on sci-fi, fantasy, and horror, whether you prefer books, movies, TV, video games, anime, or whatever you choose. You can find links to interesting videos on my Facebook page, Full Contact Nerd. You can find links to interesting news articles and academic studies on my Twitter page, Full Contact Nerd. You can find cosplay model and convention photos on my Instagram page, Chris Alvarez Sci-Fi. You can find my interview videos on my YouTube page, Full Contact Nerd. You can also sign up for my newsletter at chrisalvarez.com or fullcontactnerd.com. In the newsletter, I post additional video and news links, as well as regular updates on new, nerd-friendly fiction and nonfiction books being published. Please remember, my name Chris does not have an H. C-R-I-S. Thank you for listening, and keep imagining the past, the present, and the future.